Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Don't Fear the Wait with your tiny unicorn host. I don't know if you can actually see anybody who is watching on the YouTube. My unicorn t-shirt is just phenomenal. Can you see that? That is like literally me, isn't it? It's about right. It's about right. I have another on the hot seat unicorn with me today, Dr. Paul Rimmer, PhD. I've got to bring in that PhD because it's on his Instagram handle and he's very proud of it. So hi Paul.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm all good, my man. How about yourself?
I'm good. Firstly, just thanks for welcoming me back on again. It's been a while since we've done anything. I can't remember what I spoke about last. Metabolic adaptations-ish stuff last time.
Metabolic adaptation, yeah. That got quite a big representation and following, especially from Mr. Lyle McDonald, who thought that you were absolutely amazing at that point.
Yeah, I've been doing, interestingly, doing a little bit of work with Lyle, sort of inadvertently at the moment. He's been contributing to one of the sort of weight loss groups that I kind of dip into. I get asked to do talks and stuff on there, and he's been contributing to the same group. So yeah, we've crossed paths since. Not spoke to him personally, but yeah, we still bump into each other on internet land on occasion. So yeah, that's very sort of different to what we'll be talking about today. But
for sure.
Ish, yeah.
I was going to say, not really. We've got some kind of adaptation crossing over in there,
yeah,
so it'll be all good. Just so people know who you are, if you can just give a little bit of a shout out, because I know we've done a lot of work together in the past, but people who are new and listening in and that kind of thing, just give us a bit of a background from you, if you don't mind.
Okay, so I guess I'd loosely refer to myself as, well, a nutritionist and physiologist, but I do some education work as well. So my other business is TRA Performance Education, plug there. Obviously, we've not been able to host any events with the COVID stuff going on, but we've had all kinds of people come over and talk, from like Scott Stevenson from the bodybuilding world to sort of Brad Schoenfeld, and Nick Tominello more from the personal training world, Chris Beardsley, who's probably going to enter some of the stuff he's put out and around fatigue, and some of the stuff we're going to talk about today is, he's done events with us and stuff. So that's one aspect of it. And then I am currently sat in what looks like my garage, but actually it's my little performance clinic, which is in Leeds. So I've been building that over the last kind of 12 months now, where I do strength and conditioning work. And then I've got all your basic physiology testing. So like VO2 max testing, lactate threshold testing, body composition stuff, where I operate out of on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, I guess, yeah, physiologist, nutritionist, educator, all-round idiot. We
forgot that one.
Probably somewhat what I do, really. So yeah.
Cool. So the reason why we obviously decided to hook up again is because I've been having a look at your training, what you've been up to over the last kind of few weeks and months, trying to entertain yourself and keep yourself out of trouble during the period of lockdown. And we're kind of doing realistically the same kind of thing, which is known as concurrent training. And that's why I thought it'd be quite an interesting conversation to have it, because obviously you are a 6'2" tall, big, wide, broad human being who is of the male gender as well. And I am not. I am completely the opposite to that kind of thing. However, we are still concurrently training in around about the same kind of way from what I've seen on your socials. So do you want to give a little bit of an overview of what we mean by concurrent training, and why have you personally decided to take this on board?
That's a really good question. I'll start with the why first. Okay. I think because when I was building this place, as I alluded to, over the last 12 to 18 months, I really just kind of ran out of time to do a lot of strength work. Didn't have access to a gym at hand. So I was doing band work, body weight work, stuff like that. And as I'm sure anyone watching this has been doing home workouts, it's not quite the same. You can be productive, but it's not quite the same. So I needed to sort of pass my time, and I really got into kind of doing a bit of running, bit of swimming, bit of cycling. You can always take a bike with you. Usually, wherever I am, I could get out on the bike or hit the roads. And then what happened was, after a few months of really neglecting my strength training, it started to really depress me, because I like being strong. Yeah. And I started to lose muscle mass, and more from a vanity perspective more than anything. Initially, I kind of then tried to balance things out. So it wasn't something I intentionally went into, was like, I'm going to become this like super hybrid athlete, and program in that regard. It was just a case of literally fitting in whatever training I could do to keep me sane around building this place, traveling a lot over the last 12 months. So that's kind of why I got into it. And obviously then, as I kind of got through, what I realized was, because I'm competitive with myself, not with other people really. What I got really into then, and I think I'd always come from a background of whether it was wrestling or bodybuilding or powerlifting or strength sports, whatever you want. I always wanted to kind of maximize my own potential. And what I realized was, there was a lack of structure, which I hate because I'm a giant toddler.
Yeah.
And I need that structure, whether it's my nutrition or my training. And I just thought, well, if I'm going to do this, let's have a run at it and do it properly. And having the background that I've got in sort of physiology and nutrition, I had the tools to do it and the people around me, you know, experts who program those sorts of sports, guys who are fairly jacked, strong, but also do ultra endurance stuff.
Yeah.
So it just kind of seemed silly for me to just keep just treading water, really. So I guess when we're talking about concurrent training, that's what we're talking about. It's the capacity to be working. You know, if you think of our performance on a spectrum of strength-based stuff and the adaptations we get from strength training and endurance-based adaptations, and the concept surrounding the interference between those two things, which I'm sure we'll get onto, it's balancing. And ultimately what it comes down to is when you're trying to create those two levels of adaptation, it's balancing the fatigue and your training load so that you can create the adaptations rather than driving yourself into a hole through just like lumping on training volume. And that's something when I first started, I worked up to kind of doing around about half Ironman distance in trials. So that's like a 1.8 kilometer swim, 90 kilometer bike ride, and a half marathon. And I was doing that quite comfortably. But what I noticed was that step up from like a half Ironman to a full Ironman, the duration of time on the bike, the duration of time in the pool, the duration of time on the road, was just trying to balance that with my strength work. Just couldn't do it. So I was like, well, I could do it, but not with the approach I was using. So then I started to get a bit more methodical about things. So yeah, I guess for me, that's what it's about now. It's about being able to be much probably like academically, a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none.
Right.
You know?
Okay.
So I've resigned myself to the fact I'm never going to be like a sub 3 hour marathon runner. It's not going to happen. But I am, one of my greatest strengths and probably weaknesses, depending on context, is my stubbornness. So as long as I can get myself physically in shape enough to get through something, I will just persist with that as well, which is, I guess, the challenges that you're talking about, I've been doing over the last few months. So tell me a little bit about your challenge and what kind of triggered that process of you wanting to get to that point.
Oh my God, it's just stupid. Mine is just stupid, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, I did my bench press, I qualified for the Worlds, and I was very, very excited to go to Worlds. And then, of course, COVID happened, bastard Rona, we're not going to go to the Worlds. And it came out, I think it was last week or the week before, that British powerlifting are basically not going to send any international competitors over to any international competitions this year. So unfortunately, the first time that I was invited to Worlds to represent Britain, I couldn't do it. So it kind of gave me a sad, if I'm honest with you, as it would do. So I needed something that was going to kind of like spark my interest, give me something else to kind of focus on at the same time. But also I wanted to raise a little bit of money for the NHS. As you well know, I'm also an adult nurse, and I still practice a couple of days a month to keep my registration up. So I understood how hard the NHS had it, and I just wanted to kind of give back a little bit. So what we decided to do was do a full powerlifting meet at home, which is going to be recorded, streamed, and I'm going to have a referee there calling all of my lifts. So I'm not a 3-lift lifter either. I'm just a bench presser. So this is going to be interesting. So I've been doing the squat and the deadlift a little bit more, which has been hardcore. So I'm going to do that in the morning. And then that's going to give me a total lifted in kilos. I am then going to take that amount lifted in kilos and times it by 2.2, 2 mod 2, turn it into pounds. Right? Are you still with me? Yeah. Those pounds I am then going to multiply by 100, and that is going to give me a distance in meters that I'm going to need to row later on in the afternoon.
Okay.
So realistically, I'm on track to row approximately 70,000 meters, which is going to be, yeah, it's a hell of a long way. It's going to be about 7 hours on a rower. Yeah.
It's I'm trying to think back in the day when I used to just do random events for charity. I think I did a marathon in rowing one day.
Yeah.
That was pretty tough going. So yeah, good luck with that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's pretty cool though. So I guess there's some of the nice comparisons would be kind of how you've structured your training at the moment, because obviously on the day of the event, what's quite interesting is obviously you're doing both on the same day. Is that reflected in your training at the moment, or have you tried to separate your rowing from your strength training? Because at the moment we're in, an adaptive phase rather than performance phase? How have you kind of gone about approaching those things?
Yeah, again, it's interesting because obviously I am not an endurance athlete by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a strength athlete and I'm a bodybuilder. So I like to be a little bit strong and I like to look a little bit pretty. And that on stage, that's about it, right? In terms of endurance, I first of all needed to see where I was at that particular point. So I had to do a couple of tests. So sprint tests and VO2 max, like you were talking about, and lactate threshold and things like that. Lactate threshold is disgusting for anybody who doesn't know what it is. It is absolutely horrendous. But yeah, so all of that needed to be done. Now, how we've structured it at the moment is that I'm doing strength training in the morning. So I'll have a look and, like, say, for example, yesterday, that'll be all of my squat training with some little fluff work to obviously help out with the accessories and, you know, bring up some weaker points. And then I'll give myself a break of about 6 to 7 hours, refuel, rehydrate, etc. And then on the Monday, I'll do some sprint training. So I'll actually split it up in that regard. There's a very, very good reason as to why I'm sprinting rather than actually rowing all the time, because rowing is extremely fatiguing and it can take a hell of a lot out of you. So you don't need that. The other reason why we bring in sprinting is, so let me just move into the other room because I'm having some work done on my garden. And unfortunately, the whole thing fell apart. So now I need piling put in the garden. And it's fucking noisy. So I shall just move. Yeah.
I can't hear too much for that, for the record.
You know what that is?
I can't pick it up. I know what it is, but I can't hear it. Not too much, no.
Oh, that's all right. I'm still going to be in here.
Yeah.
So basically, what was I saying then? The reason as to why I'm not rowing all the time is because it's extremely fatiguing and that kind of thing. The reason why I'm using sprinting is because of the simple fact that I need to get my heart rate up and conditioned in a certain parameter, and sprinting will be able to get that heart rate up a lot higher than rowing would do, because otherwise you're just going to be locally fatigued before your heart rate can spike. So that's the reason why I use sprints, and that is on a 3-week undulating basis. So the first week I'll do 400 meters every 4 minutes, which is then slowly being brought down. So the last one that I did was every 3.5 minutes, then 200 meters every 2 minutes, and then yesterday was 100 meters every 60 seconds, and just basically analyzing your heart rate from there. So that's realistically how I'm doing it. I'm not doing 2-a-days every single day because there's only so much conditioning that you can do. There are certain aspects of my day where I am putting some fatiguing elements in prior to a row or prior to some strength sessions, because you cannot simply train 70,000 meter rows by rowing 70,000 meters. So, you know, you're going to have to condition yourself in different ways in order to do that. So that's how I've structured mine at the moment, with help from my very, very, very good Scottish friend, pale Scottish friend up north, Mr. Johnny Payne. So
I thought so. I didn't want to allude to it too much. Yeah. So I find that really interesting, and I agree with you. Like on not that there's anything to disagree with, but in terms of the, I found that because, like, some of the principles around fatigue and fatigue management when you're trying to do two things is really important, because I think the interference effect from a mechanistic perspective is, you know, if you do your endurance work, you get this elevations in something called adenosine monophosphokinase, and that interferes with your mTOR pathways, which is your strength adaptive pathways. That's as much science as we're going to talk today. And that's kind of churned out as kind of gospel within the community. A bodybuilding community is like, oh, you shouldn't do your cardio because it'll interfere with your weights and your muscle hypertrophy stuff. However, what's interesting is, again, if you separate those two, is the interference effect there? Possibly not as pronounced. The second thing is the interference effect, if it exists, which is still debated, but it's touted out as kind of gospel, is it's the duration and intensity. Like you said before, the long, slow stuff doesn't seem fatiguing at the time because it's lower intensity. Mm-hmm. But the longer the duration of something, the longer the fatigue tends to last.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why I do a lot of bike intervals, because fatigue fast, recover fast. Yeah. Which sounds silly because I think people talk about, oh, it's, you know, the accumulation of lactate and all that stuff. You can feel that fatigue in the muscles. Accumulation of hydrogen, I should say, actually. People say lactate. You know, people feel that and think, oh, that's really fatiguing, because they feel broken down for a few hours afterwards and they really struggle to recover. Where actually, for example, what I've had to do now, I've gone back into a kind of, again, I'm not going to maximize the adaptations for one, and both maximally, because at the moment I'm also cutting calories a little bit to improve my power to weight ratio, because my running sucks. And the quickest way for me to improve my running, just from a joint loading perspective, which again, being a bigger, stronger person, it's not just about, you know, your programming in terms of your training load, in terms of your recovery, it's programming your training load in terms of the capacity for your body to tolerate those loads and build those up slowly. And that's one of the mistakes I made last year, was basically jumping in too much and doing too much running, started getting knee pain, back pain, hip pain, Jonathan pain. Sorry, couldn't help it.
Got to do it.
I couldn't help it. So yeah, I started noticing then actually my long endurance runs now are very progressive, slow and progressive, but that's more to do with a tissue loading adaptation rather than, and a musculature stability adaptation, rather than simply, I'm just going to run for miles and miles and miles, even though on my aerobic system, it might not be taxing, because actually the fatigue you're getting from that is the sort of CNS, central nervous system fatigue, central fatigue, which is what wipes you out for 3 or 4 days. Sure. You know, whereas when you're doing your interval stuff, what I've found is I can do intervals every day as long as I keep them proper intervals, high intensity, no more than 6-7 minutes at a time, a couple of slightly longer, higher intensity rides a week. But then my running at the moment, which isn't great for building speed, and it's something I do need to do more of, is very long and slow and conditioning my body to those sorts of things. So when it comes to the notion of this interference effect, you know, I think people spout it as something that's like a definite thing, but it can be impacted by the type of exercise you're doing, the duration of the exercise you're doing. What I find fascinating about what you're doing with rowing being a full body exercise, in effect, there's leg drive, there's back movements, is that when you look at concurrent training, when you look at kind of HIIT intervals and resistance training, we know that HIIT intervals will interfere with strength to a certain point, because the metabolites that you get, especially if they're close together, I'm talking about here, the metabolites you get for that will interfere with neuromuscular drive. So you get reductions in force output, but it won't interfere with hypertrophy. So again, if you're going to do so that means what I would do is just put my strength work first and then do my intervals afterwards, because then that way I'm not getting fatigue, or separate them if I wanted to do one the other way around. But what I find fascinating about that is when you look at that stuff, the impact on that AMPK mTOR pathway doesn't seem to be there. There doesn't seem to be that AMPK signaling as much. Mm-hmm. So it's not to say that fatigue doesn't exist. Of course it does. But I think that there's a lot of debates and conflicting evidence within that area where people spout that as being something they should worry about, particularly bodybuilders, when actually the intensities most of them are doing cardio probably isn't going to massively elevate AMPK. The durations at which they're doing it probably isn't going to massively elevate AMPK. And the separation between the cardio and the resistance training is going to be, sufficient enough to do that. And actually probably reductions in strength and limitations in growth potential are going to be more due to the fact that it's caloric restriction and overall fatigue, overall cumulative training volume fatigue, rather than worrying about if this signaling pathway is interfering with another one or whatever it might be. So I think that's a pragmatic approach. And one of the interesting things is that when you look at concurrent training, like the research on HIIT training, like lower body HIIT training, whether it's running or cycling, it tends to interfere with lower body strength, not so much hypertrophy, but lower body strength, but not upper body strength. What I find fascinating about what you're doing is cycling and running is fine for me. Yeah, my squat and my deadlift might suffer a little bit if I'm not careful about how I program those things. But my bench press hasn't really suffered. It's actually improved markedly since I've started strength training again, because it's recovered. Sure. I'm still only about 75% of my 1RM, but I am also about 15 kilos lighter than when I last set, my 1RM bench. So I'm a way sub-elite lifter compared to yourself. But, I want to get back to that at a lighter weight. But I have noticed, and what I'm interested in with you is, how have you found, because of rowing is a full body exercise, is that if you compared to, say, other training blocks where you've done similar things, are you noticing an impact of that, or is it
no
too much?
No, the reason being is because I don't actually row that much, which is surprising, because like I was just saying, rowing is extremely taxing. I only do one long endurance row a week, which is on a Saturday, and I started at just 10,000 meters. Then I just slowly started bringing it up, and then last Saturday I did 17,500 meters in just 1 hour and 31 minutes, which wasn't bad going, to be perfectly honest. It was going all right. There are still some tweaks, because I am not an efficient rower, because didn't row for a long time. You know, I've never really rowed, and it's not an exercise of choice that you would actually have as a bodybuilder, or anything along those lines. So in terms of endurance work, I don't necessarily do a lot of it in terms of rowing. I'll only do that one long row a week, and then once a week as well, I'll do rower hit intervals. So it will be 30 seconds on, just going RP 9 on the rower, and then 2 minutes off as in recovery. And you just try and aim to get between 18 and 24 intervals of those, with a nice recovery pathway for it. So the fact that I do those intervals after my training, as in after my strength training, and I still have between 5 o'clock in the evening until like 10, 11 o'clock in the morning before I start my strength gains again, or strength lifting again, it hasn't actually interfered. Now, the other thing that I've got to realistically consider is the fact that I have not competitively squat or deadlift for 2 years. You know, I gave that up due to a medical issue. So I deadlift for fun, and I squat for fun, just because I enjoy having that weight on my back and in my hands. But I don't necessarily feel the fatigue at all. When I did go out and I was doing some running, I'm a shit runner. It just really destroys me. Even going out for like a 15-minute kind of cool down run, I'm like that. I really don't want to do it. But, you know, it's cooling down after legs, and it's getting rid of all of those metabolites that have built up after a heavy leg session and things. So that's the reason why I do it. But no, it hasn't affected anything. It certainly hasn't affected my bench press at all. In fact, I think it's actually helped my bench press, because rowing movements are strengthening your lats, and it's improving your posture and your upper back at the same time, as long as you row efficiently. So you can row and row and row and not actually get a full benefit from a full body exercise. You'll see a lot of people just kind of flop and bring themselves back, you know, and kind of be like a rag doll on a rower, when actually you shouldn't be doing that. It is a full body exercise, and you're using leg drive like you were saying previously. The one thing that I have noticed is that my ass hurts a lot. Yeah,
ass conditioning.
Oh yes, that is the one thing. And even my husband was saying previously the other day, he was like, dude, your ass looks amazing in those jeans. I'm like, rowing. It is rowing, because there's nothing else that I'm doing. So yeah, maybe we should contact Brett Contreras and just kind of say, bring in some rowing intervals. That will build your butt.
It's interesting you could say that, because I found like a similar experience is when I started taking up endurance sports, it was the unexpected things that I thought I'd struggle with. So like, I'm like you, I'm not a good runner because I'm heavy and I don't have a particularly efficient running pattern. I've always been fast and powerful and explosive. Like, put me on a rugby pitch, I was always quick for my size and like dynamic and explosive. But I just translating that into running, it's kind of like, it just fatigues me quickly. I get fatigued very quickly running, whereas on a bike, for some reason, I don't. I don't know if it's just because
do you find that your heart rate spikes a lot quicker as well when you run?
Yeah, and I know there's shifts in, or there can be shifts in terms of fuel usage between a bike and running, because obviously running, you're using more stabilizing muscles and core muscles and things like that. And I think that's where the relative amounts of fatigue at the same, the effort at the same heart rate and the speed, velocity at the same heart rate, the transference. If you look at, say, a decent level club Ironman athlete, for example, if you look at their running velocity relative to their bike velocity, the ratios are quite good. You always get one who's slightly stronger on the other, but my performance on a bike is so much higher than it is running, because a bike, okay, you've got road friction, but actually all I'm really dealing with on a flat surface, if I'm out on the roads, Leeds is very hilly, so it's a bit of a problem around here. Yeah. But you're only really dealing with like air resistance and road friction. So the bike is actually taking a lot of the load of my body. It's going through the load. So I'm not controlling that. My core isn't having to be as activated. I'm not having to control my musculature, my hips to run. Whereas when I'm running, everything, my legs are doing everything. So it's not just the transporting of yourself through the ether. It's that element of it I've noticed with fatigue with running. So what's fascinating is that's why I've tried to bring my body weight down so much, to the point at which now I'm around about 90 kilos at the moment. So that's like big for an endurance athlete. It's not big from where I've been previously when I've competed. But what I've noticed is there's a definite threshold between kind of like, if I get above sort of 92, 93 kilos, like my running economy just drops through the floor. Like everything just feels harder and heavier. But then it's trying to balance that with, I have a similar drop off in strength at the same point as my endurance increases with my running. So it's trying to balance those two things. But yeah, I think the the approach I've taken, which has been helpful, is just taking a more pragmatic approach. Like, I think I've always been kind of jumping in two-footed and too full on. So the fatigue and the load I was trying to train under was just so high that it was always going to have knock-on implications, because, you know, when I was fitting in long runs and strength training, it would be like, right, well, I'll run 15K 3-4 times a week, and then I'll be trying to bench on top of that, and I'm wondering why I wasn't strong. And it's like, because obviously you're getting, it's not peripheral fatigue, it's central fatigue. Whereas now I've dropped my long runs down like you've done. I have one long session a week, which is my it's a Monday session, but it's going to go to Sunday, where I'll do an hour to an hour and a half on the bike, really low heart rate, just churning the power over at endurance intensities. And then I'll just jump straight off the bike and go out for a 45-minute to an hour run, just to keep the mechanics and keep me used to being moving on my own little 2 feet. Yeah. And then the rest of the week then it's intervals, no longer than 20-minute sessions. Yeah. Most of them are in the 6 to 8 minute range, no longer than 20 minutes. And then that just allows me then, and again, I've had to take up some of my bodybuilding work, some of the hypertrophy work, just reduce the training volume down a little bit, but just really refocus on the strength stuff. And as long as I'm sort of fairly structured in my week and I give myself gaps at the right time, so after my long run, I'll always give myself a day off the day after, or, you know, or I'll be doing something which isn't just calisthenics work or bodyweight stuff, where my ego's taken out the equation. Some technical lifting stuff, shall we say. I'm basically a CrossFitter now, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. I was going to say, you're basically a CrossFitter.
Except I can't do Olympic lifts. So it's kind of one of the things. I think the challenging thing for me is I've always wanted to get better at running, but I also know with my current training, in order to do that, that's just not going to happen, because I think the event I'm eyeing up at the moment is, sorry, segue slightly, important point to make, which you touched upon, is it's the unsuspecting bits of the training that you don't account for when you look at endurance things. So like for me, I was surprised when I was doing longer runs at like how badly like my toes and my feet would blister. I know that sounds silly, but I didn't realize like how bad they would get and how my feet would swell. So if my shoes didn't fit right, it was really uncomfortable and chafing. So forget the blisters, but that, or like spending 5-6 hours in a bike seat for doing a longer run, like your undercarriage gets really sore. You know, being in an odd position, and you know, even things like doing pool swims and like swimming in a wetsuit when you're not used to it, and the friction burns and stuff like that as well. I don't know, obviously Ross Edgley does a lot of the mad kind of events, like you see when he slam around Britain, like the soreness off his wetsuit and stuff. And I was only training that like a few days a week, not very far, and I was getting like little rashes and stuff, and I was like, oh geez. So it's those weird little things where I think that's where the real value for me of doing the longer stuff has come in. Isn't so much the conditioning element and the capacity to do that. It's the weird little kinks and things where you're like, I never thought about having to Vaseline my nipples before going for a long run. Right? It's the stuff like that, which is just like, people say stuff, but a little sort of, tips and tricks that people do that, that help them. So I think, for me now, like I'm at the moment, I was working towards an Ironman, but that just went out the window last year. It just wasn't going to happen. Sure. I couldn't dedicate myself to the volume. So over the last few weeks, I've done a few like mad events. So I did like I did 100, well, it worked out 97 kilometers in 24 hours. I was just trying to hit 120,000 steps and didn't realize how close I was to 100 kilometers. Otherwise I'd have tried a bit harder. So when I checked at the end of the distance, was like that. I've done a 75K indoor marathon, 75K indoor indoor ultra, which was the most mind-numbing thing. But again, over lockdown, that's fine because it was just one day of a weekend. Sure. But now I've come out of that and I can actually get out on the roads a bit more and do that. It's like, right, okay, time to put some structure back. But I'm training towards, hopefully, if it's still on, there's an event in September called the Rock Tri, which is quite cool.
Oh, yeah, I've seen it.
In Abersoch, it's a 1,500 meter swim, which even with my limited swimming ability, I should be able to get around in an okay time. Yeah. And then it's like 50 kilometers out on the bike to the base of Snowdon, up one path, which is the Watkin path, where I used to spend many of my summers as a child messing around with my friends and waterfalls and stuff, run up, run down, 50K back, beach run. So that's my next kind of goal at the moment that I'm building towards, because the idea of doing that and taking like, I don't know how long it's going to take, 6-7 hours maybe. I know I can move that. So I guess in that regard, then after that's done, because again, that's a lot less running, a lot more cycling and swimming. I'm going to try this year to try and get myself a decent 5K time, because it's it's just terrible. It doesn't seem to matter whether I run for 20 minutes or 2 hours. It's the same speed. Going any faster just ruins me. You know, it makes no sense whatsoever. So
what's your time? What's your 5K time?
Oh, my 5K time, my quickest 5K time since I started back running last year is probably about 25 minutes, which isn't...
It's not bad though, to be fair, for a 90-kilo guy.
Yeah, I was probably heavier at that point. Like now, I mean, the problem is here, like genuinely this excuse-making time, is where I live. There isn't a flat bit of terrain. And although you can say what goes up must come down, like it isn't the same. It's just not in terms of the fatigability of hitting hills and stuff. So I need to find a running track to get an actual 5K. My goal, the quickest 5K I've ever done is around about 21 minutes. And weirdly enough, that was when, many moons ago, it was when I was actually dieting for my first ever bodybuilding show. And I was just doing a lot of road work. And I was very light.
Oh, it wasn't when you were running away in terms of like the Jammy Dodger incident.
No. We'll say that one for the time. Forgotten about that. Just in case my mother's watching. I got down to like 91 kilos, and just the sheer volume of endurance training I was doing. At the time, I was dating a girl who was into her running and her triathlon stuff. So we just got running together all the time. And like, because I was doing running, shockingly, the more you do something with someone who's got a fairly structured training plan, shockingly, when you follow a structured training program, you progress much quicker than just going, it's weird that, isn't it? Rather than just going, you know what, I'm just going to head out and just do 8K, 9K tonight, which is kind of what I've been doing at the moment, because actually for me with that stuff, it's more about completion rather than it is about time for now. With the exception of the bike, where a little bit of ego comes in, because I'm decent on the bike for my size. I still got some improvements to make, but they're coming back really, really quickly. And I don't know why. Well, I've got some theories as to why, but like my relative effort on a bike for the power wattage I can put out, it just seems so much lower than it does for running or anything else, really. So yeah, I guess it's just my bias is going back towards heavy benching and bikes, because being on the bike because I like it, whereas the other stuff I hate, so I do less of it.
It's funny though, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, it is funny. So many people have actually said that to me when I design their programs for them, and they're like, can I take this out because I really don't like it? And can I take that out because it's really horrible? And it's like, well, do you know what? Sometimes you need to do the horrible shit in order to get better at the good shit that you want to do. And it's one of those, it's like, I hate cleans. I absolutely fucking hate cleans. But the reason why I do them is because realistically, it's mimicking a rowing movement for the triple extension, you know? I mean, I'm not doing snatches, I'm just doing barbell cleans. But that entire triple extension up to your hips and then moving up into your pull, that is a rowing movement. So there is method behind the reason as to why we do certain things. But I hate them. And like you were saying, these weird tidbits, I completely and utterly like destroyed my thumb doing cleans because of the constant friction that goes up with the barbell. So just like taping them up with masking tape, it just saves you that little bit of anguish, because I have to say that freaking hurts. It really does. So in terms of your concurrent training then, let's just kind of dive into a little bit more about the nutritional aspects. What have you changed? I mean, I know that you're saying you're cutting a little bit, but have you found that if you're doing 2-a-days, you need to fuel differently, separately, that kind of thing?
I tend to, so again, there's a million and one ways to skin a cat when it comes to nutrition and this stuff. Personally, so like yesterday's my long day. It's low intensity, not too much effort. So I will tend to use, and contradictory to what some people might do, so I'm not suggesting this is the right way to do it, it's just the way that I do it at the moment, and there's some evidence for it in terms of training low. For my longer runs and rides, low intensity, where I'm going to be using more fat oxidation, more fat as a fuel, I will just kind of under-fuel those sessions a little bit, so I'll go in low carb, just so my body's getting used to being a bigger guy on a longer event. I'm going to get through glycogen at some point, so therefore your body needs to be able to switch between fat and carbs as a fuel source quite effectively. So I condition my body just in case I do a long run and I get in the middle of nowhere and I run out of carbs, gels or whatever it might be. I need to know that I've got it in the tank, even just psychologically, to be able to cruise. So on those long days, so yesterday's session was about 2 hours. I'll have protein, fats for breakfast. So it's not no food, it's not fasting, it's just low carb, difference engine there. I'll use those days to kind of chip into my calorie deficit over the course of the week. So I don't really use a linear approach as such on each day. I tend to, at the moment, just because of timing issues and stuff, I tend to then say, like my bike interval sessions, I will throw in at the end of one of my strength sessions, because again, they're short, they're sharp, they're at the end of a session. And I'm trying to manage my fatigue, because I'm trying to make sure those sessions don't really get, I've had a few sessions which I haven't finished because I've just been really tired. And that's been more, to be honest, just business and sleep stuff lately has been really impacting me for some reason. But I've been trying to keep my sessions, generally speaking, to like an 8 out of 10, an RPA out of 10. So that I'm not, like, my intervals are programmed so I can't really fail them. So the fatigue is there and I'm progressing it. And obviously over time, as you progress, you will fall off, but then it's not just digging in too deep and like really hammering myself. So my sessions, I would say, are hard and intense, but I'm also not just, you know, I'm trying to not just go like, well, if I've got my sessions and I've done my intervals and I feel good that day, I'm not just going, right, I'm just going to dig in and like, you're feeling aggressive or whatever it might be, right, I'm going to really hammer myself. I'm trying to stay structured to the program. So give my body the time, energy and potential to adapt, particularly because I'm in a period of caloric restriction. Because obviously, you know, the less energy you have, the less adaptive potential you have, and the more potential for fatigue you have. You know, so I marry it that way around. So as a general rule, I try and keep my fats fairly low, low but within healthy levels is what I would say, not like zero. And then try and keep my carbs high on the strength days and the interval days, because that's the main fuel source. You want to fuel for those adaptations. Then on my longer runs, I will generally keep it low and use that to chip into my calorie intake and whatever. So yeah, I think, to be honest, over the last few weeks, I've probably been, because I've been sort of, I kind of got to the point where my bench had got up to a point where I was happy with it. And I didn't really want to get stronger with that for now, because I'm not going to get stronger with that until I put some more food back in. So I was kind of just going like, right, okay, well, let's just chase the fat loss a little bit, because that's going to improve my running economy and all that kind of stuff. Whereas I've now, well, probably in the next week to 10 days, I will have finished my fat loss phase. And then what I'll do is then I'll start to then just, again, still working on that train low for the longer, slower stuff, and then just keep more carbs in and around my training on the sort of high intensity days, particularly a big carb meal, sort of 3 to 4 hours before I'm doing my strength work and my interval work as well. And that generally gets me through, really. But like I said, the sessions themselves aren't so long and at those intensities or thresholds where I'm like so reliant on carbs. You know, like a strength session, like I am keeping it really simple, like very little hypertrophy work, using mostly calisthenics for that. My strength sessions are strength sessions, like no more than 5 reps, few sets of that, few sets of heavy pull-ups, few sets of heavy rows. I have to be careful with my squats and my deadlifts because I'm recovering from a back injury. So that's kind of helped my overall load management, because I'm only really focusing on bench at the moment. Not because, you know, I'm lazy or I just don't like doing the other lifts. It's just I've got to be careful. So, I mean, my back squat now, I've only really started going back to full back squatting for the first time in about 2 years, about 4 weeks ago. And I'm like smashing out a massive, it's written on the wall there. Yeah, like 110 for 5 is where I'm at the moment. It's a bit of a check to the ego. But again, with that stuff, because I'm always trying to keep, I'll test every sort of 6 to 8 weeks to see where I'm at. Not with that, but with my bench, because I don't trust my back yet. But with that, I'm always trying to keep at least 2 or 3 reps in reserve, you know, and if I don't feel like that, I'm not going to increase the weight. That's more, with that stuff, it's more from an injury perspective thing rather than just a load fatigue management stuff. So yeah, my nutrition around that in terms of supplementation, not really used too much stuff really, apart from, because again, I'm training low, so I'm not really putting carbs in on those rides or runs and rides, because I just don't really feel a need for them at this point. If they start going above 2 hours, then I will put some carbs in, but just a low amount of carbohydrate probably for the second half, just when I feel my legs starting to get heavy. Again, you've got to listen to your body and give it feedback. And also partly as well for some gut training, because obviously when you get out into racing territory, you are going to want to fuel. So that will be something, again, it's probably put in another longer run or ride a week where I'm actually training my gut to be able to take carbohydrates on board, because as much as it's nice to be adapted, you still want to be able to fuel as best you can. So that's the approach with that. Yeah, supplementation wise, for my interval stuff, I'll use, I've been using some beta-alanine just for the interval kind of stuff, the lactate buffer, hydrogen buffer, sorry. I'm just looking at my shelf over there to remind myself. I've kept some creatine in, because actually I just find that with the strength work, that just helps me keep it there, probably more psychologically than anything else, to be honest, at the moment. And obviously we're still doing the high intensity interval type stuff, you know, having the creatine there as well, from the hydration perspective, from the performance perspective. But I think as I get closer towards competition, when like my event, when power to weight becomes a little bit more important, you know, if I'm holding 2 or 3 pounds of water, from that, you know, on a hill, that can make a world of difference, which is why if you look at sort of Team Sky and people like that, they're obsessed with weight. You know, so I think once I get towards, and again, you can, I think this is an interesting thing with supplements, like you can periodize supplements. People think like you just have to take them like year round and whatever it is, you know, your supplements should match your goals. So, and then obviously the most important supplement of them all.
It's food.
Sorry?
It's food.
Food? No, not food. Caffeine. All of the caffeine, all of the time.
All of the caffeine, all of the time. But then you've got to be worried about the adaptation process to the caffeine, don't you? So all of those adrenals are going to get massively fatigued, and you're going to have to be very, very careful with that.
For me, the caffeine is, I've never really got a big stimulant buzz off caffeine. For me, it's the anti-fatigue effect. So I noticed that I don't feel as fatigued. But for me, I'm not one of these people who feels like they need to get up for training. When I'm in the mood for training, I don't really feel like, you know, sometimes caffeine can make you quite trippy and intense and that sort of stuff. I'm not the kind of person who's ever used caffeine for that. I've never been a big pre-workout person. It's more just the anti-fatigue stuff. So I've noticed that I think you become sensitized to caffeine quite quickly from the stimulatory effects. And I'm not suggesting they don't have benefits. It's just I've never really noticed them. But from the anti-fatigue effects, I don't think you get as habituated to that, or at least I don't personally. So I notice if I don't have a coffee of an afternoon, my energy levels drop a little bit. So even though I drink quite a lot, you know, and again, I tend to drink more of actual coffee beans rather than just, you know, stimulating with caffeine, because some of the antioxidant effects as well, which might help with endurance performance and stuff. So there's interesting stuff around coffee and that really. I do try and have periods away from it to resensitize myself, but I get quite bad caffeine headaches. So I should really just plow through, or taper off a little bit. But again, I do try and cycle it a little bit. Like, so if I'm having a day where I'm not doing a lot of training or I've not got a lot of work off, I will try and make sure I only have, you know, maybe none of a morning and then just a coffee of an afternoon. I don't know if that's got any efficacy really in terms of science, but it seems to work for me. So I'm going to stick with it as well.
That's
I
it,
just
roll with it.
really like the taste of it. So
that's it, isn't it? I mean, I'll only have 2 coffees of a morning time, just because that's when I feel like I'm more productive and I enjoy my coffee when I do my work. So I get up and I just start cracking on with work. You know, I've got a lot on at the moment. I've got a lot of athletes who are still competing wherever they're going to be competing. So they need to be looked after. So they get all of my work and undivided attention at 5:30 in the morning. So I enjoy a coffee with work. But because I like the taste of coffee, I do also have a decaf coffee round about 3 o'clock, which is about the time that we're having now. So we are going to have a coffee break. But no, it is interesting. So I love the aspect of periodizing everything. I love periodizing training, nutrition, your goals, and of course supplementation. So again, these people who do say you need to take supplementation of this year round and do it all year round, actually it's not really that effective if you take it year round. You're just going to be burning a hole in your pocket if you do take it year round, and you need to have the supplements to support your goals at the same time, like you were saying. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that, and we might do a podcast on supplement, but probably later on down the line. But it'd be interesting to kind of do that and how we periodize it, especially coming out of the back of a concurrent training program.
Which is interesting to say that, because I am in talks at the moment about launching my own performance nutrition range, which will be no fluff and filler. But what's interesting about the approach that we're taking is it's not going to be bodybuilding stuff. It's going to be periodized subscriptions for endurance athletes through different phases of their training, or sports people through different phases of their training. So Amazing. It would be like a package type stuff of what people call evidence-based supplements, and they fill in with loads of crap that don't work. It's not so much that the supplements are going to be new or groundbreaking or cutting edge, because I'm not in the business of bullshitting people on that front. But what it's going to be is kind of like performance packs, training block packs and stuff as well. So yeah, I'm in negotiations with how to get that stuff sorted, making sure it's all informed sport tested and stuff as well, because it's something I want to build into kind of my coaching packages more than anything. So yeah, I've actually got supposed to have a conversation with someone this afternoon. I'm waiting on confirmation for that this evening to discuss how it works as like an end-to-end process.
Cool.
So yeah, that's my next focus really. is to, again, just keep it simple, you know, nothing too that's cutting edge or anything, because to be honest, most of the cutting edge stuff that works is pretty poor science, or it's paid for by crappy labs.
Yep.
So yeah, you know, just using your basic stuff like your creatine, the beta-alanine, all the kind of stuff, you know, even like caffeine related things like that as well. Anything which is performance related, electrolytes, stuff like that, and trying to get it so that it kind of comes in one unique, distinct thing, so people can just grab and go, really. So that's something I'm working on. Yeah. So supplements is something I've been involved with in a long time. Unfortunately, it was kind of my starting place in this industry, was working in that supplement sector. So yeah, in terms of ingredient profiles and stuff like that, things to watch out for is that's a big discussion within itself.
It is, isn't it? And we'll probably have a catch up with that kind of thing. So I think we're just about coming up on time here, Paul, but I want to thank you very much for giving up your time to obviously have a chat today about your current goals, or concurrent goals, should I say. And we'll catch up again once we've both done some events. So when is your event going on? That's in September, right?
Meant to be the 9th of September, and I've not signed up for it yet, because I'm just waiting to see what happens over the next few weeks with the thing, and if there's a second wave or whatever. You know, I'd just rather just know. So, but if not, I will be doing something stupid in the near future.
Yay.
I'm not sure what yet, but I'll be doing something stupid.
Oh, well, we'll definitely catch up about that side of things then, we'll be doing.
So when's your event?
16th of August.
Cool.
Yeah. So that'll be all out on the social, so you can have a watch. We'll be doing some live streaming at certain points as well, so people can obviously come and have a look, because, you know, well, first of all, it has to be invigilated by a referee, so that's going to happen anyway, because otherwise I can just kind of go, yeah, that was in, and you can't do that. And then, of course, 7 hours on a rower, I'm going to have to keep myself entertained by doing something, and what's more entertaining than letting the time pass by doing a live feed and people can talk to me, which would be very, very nice. So yeah, so we'll do that one and have a catch up. But guys, if you have any questions for Dr. Paul Rimmer or myself, then please obviously put them in the comment section on the YouTube video. I'll put Paul's details down, so if you are interested in any kind of endurance coaching at all, then please obviously hit him up. And if you are an athlete that just wants to have some testing done in his lab when he is nice and open again, then again, you can just contact him directly and he'll do all of that for you. Once again, Paul, thanks very much for your time today. Guys, thank you for tuning in, and I will catch you on the next episode of Don't Fear the Wait. Take care.